Hello and welcome to That's Just Human. It's a podcast that explores all aspects of being human, living in a body, and dealing with life's obstacles. Here we discuss people's stories, learn practical tools for growth and healing that help you learn to step into your true and authentic self and aliveness. I am Elisha LightAngel. I am a licensed massage therapist among many other certifications and titles and hats. And just like you, I have lived in my body and had the pleasure of experiencing life as a human, and we're here to discuss that today. So if you will, join me in welcoming the lovely and beautiful Olga Cherry. I recently met her through a beautiful connection online, and she is a transformation therapist, and we'll talk about that and get into that, her story today, and how she has come to this point of really helping people to get into some of the root causes of their emotion and not just know about it, but to really push it out, move through it so that they can heal and move beyond and live an even better life than what they're currently sitting in. So welcome, Olga.
Hi everyone. Hi Elisha. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to share my wisdom, share my knowledge, and actually my mission in this life to help people to transform as much as I could. So you inviting me to this podcast is actually falling into this goal. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm so excited to get into some of your story and how you've arrived at helping other people to transform. And so you've transformed a lot in your own life. Share with us a little bit about what your childhood was like and how that had an impact on you.
Wow, you're starting from the heavy questions. Okay. Actually, for me, right now, I don't perceive it as heavy because now I see why it was happening. But at that time, like in the childhood, my time there was like a war. So every day I was waking up to the war with my grandmother. Because she was Syrian or something, and she was constantly demanding to her will, like, I want you to do this, you doing this wrong, and all the stuff. It was every single day. I have had my mother also lived with us, but she was at work, and like most of the time I spent with my grandmother, and it was kind of hedge. So yeah, and I was suppressed. I was forbidden from like everything and like a lot of other stuff. We fight almost every day. It was like that. It was constant something wrong, something not the way she wanted, and all the way. It mirrored in other relationships. So in school, I was bullied in some kind of, actually I went through the hospitals in my childhood. So in hospitals, I was bullied also. It was like that. It was always some struggle, some suffering. And it didn't seem like right, but for some reason now I understand, but there I didn't. I always was like open to this life. I try to enjoy everything that I have, like my connection to. So, for example, every Sunday I watched Disney movies because it was shown on our Russian television. And it was like the holiday day for me because it was like, okay, like for hour in my life, I can enjoy something. And it was like that, something like that. I was kind of positive person all the time. I don't know how I managed that. Like for now, it is uncomprehensible. I don't know what is the word. I was always positive. I was always full of energy. I was always like, because I have had like a lot of energy inside of me, and this depression was like trying to like stop me, but it couldn't do it like all the way because like this is nature. You cannot stop it. So something like that.
Now, when we spoke earlier on our own, you had talked about being sick in your body a lot as a child. And can you talk a little bit about that and what that was like? And did that contribute to some of the depression that you were experiencing?
Yes, but like other way around. I believe that suppression and all the inner stuff that we're going through is affecting our health. So yes, it was like that. I was really constantly sick with something. If it wasn't like bronchitis, I was having chronic bronchitis, chronic UTIs, chronic gastrointestinal issues, like different kinds of like in the different parts of my body. So it was like that, always something, because like I was always in some kind of suppression of my desires or of my will or of my power. It was like that. I went from hospital to hospital. I was like on one medication to another medication and all that stuff. I didn't come to like dying or something. It wasn't like really heavy, but I was going through it like with the bunch of diseases up until I was 30. So all the time, like even when I like grew up and went to live on my own, have had my own life, I still was carrying every 1 or 2 months I was having bronchitis. My immune system was low, like really low. All the time I was having some kind of pain in the back, in the something. Sometimes I didn't even go to the doctor because it was like, okay, this pain is with me like for a few months. I'm not dying, it's okay. It was like that. Because you kind of getting tired of going to doctors. They are giving you some medicine. It doesn't help. What's the point? So it was like that, just up until 30. I was already in therapy for a few years. I also started working with chiropractor and some kind of osteopath, other body practices, and diseases started go away. But I believe that the root point that helped me release all these diseases is working on my mindset, on my perception of life, and it started changing. And that helped me to open up to these practices. And they helped me to take all this pain, all this suffering from my body.
So, was there anything specific that helped you to feel more connected to your body that allowed you to introduce these therapies that began that healing journey for you?
I would say that while I was going through that, actually, when I went to therapy, I didn't go for my health, like at all. I was used to these health issues. I was like, I just need to put a coat on, like don't eat ice cream too much and something like that. You get used to it. You get used to getting sick. You get used to pain. It is all like, it gets like kind of common for you. To the therapy, I went for my goals. I wanted more money. I wanted to find a job that would be more aligned. I was employed at that moment. So I mainly went to transform my like personal life, I would say. And health issues was just like side effect because I didn't focus on them at all. It was kind of like a side effect. At the time, it wasn't about connection to the body. I started, of course, it was step by step. I was connecting, but it mostly were about clearing my mental part. So like clearing myself from scarcity mindset, clearing myself from destructive patterns and all that stuff. It was actually, from now perspective, I know that it was like the long way that I can do now. At that point, I believe that everything in our life, like everything, like every event that is happening is like right for us. So there is no wrong decisions, there is no wrong path. And I believe that I needed this path through all these therapies because I went to therapy for 4 years. Every week I was going to my psychologist. I needed that to open up to another possibilities, another practices, another reality, I believe that it was right, but I don't consider it effective. For example, at some point when I learned some psychology already, I was like maybe half a year in the therapy already, and found out that I have a trauma. And I was like, okay, I came to my psychologist. There is some book, I don't remember the name. And it says like, if you have like trauma for like 20 something years, cut it in half, and it will be like the time of month that you have to therapy this issue, this trauma. And I was like, okay, let's do this. It will be like 1.5 years. Let's heal this trauma. Specific trauma, it was, at that moment, it was the issue that when people are aggressive towards me, in any way, doesn't matter if I know them or I don't, I would freeze. I would freeze, and it was something like that. And I was like, okay, I want to remove that. I want to stop freezing in that state. And we learned how to not freeze when aggressive people approach me or they do something aggressive or something like that. And only later, in maybe 3 or 4 years since then, I would go to really deep therapy, subconscious therapy that like doing now with my clients, but then I was with clients. And I found out that my trauma is like in the same place. Nothing changed. I just changed my behavior. So we learned like a puppy or something. I learned how to react differently. I changed my reflexes, but I didn't heal trauma at all. Like it was all there. I was frustrated. I was like, oh my God, like 1.5 years we worked on that. Like why? And after that therapy, like deep transformational subconscious therapy, I removed this trauma like completely. I mean, not by myself, but with the specialist. Actually, I know like the formula, the result, where is trauma really gone. So it is not where like this aggression comes to you and you say no. It is when this aggression doesn't come at all. So when I got in the reality, in the world where there was no people who will be aggressive towards me, like at all, I got the concept of trauma. Like I got the understanding that trauma works like that. So we what is inside of us, like what is happening inside of us, any conflict, any pain or anything, it will be magnetizing the event. So when event is not happening, that means that you don't have anything that magnetizes this event.
To recap, you saw a therapist, and 1.5 years of work, you were still frustrated because even though you changed the behavior, you still have the trauma, but then you learned to clear that. So going through this process, has that helped you to better understand other people's trauma? So when you're working with them, you help them clear?
Of course, it was actually basically when I started, I didn't even plan to work with people. I didn't think that I would be working with people, and it started spontaneously when people started coming to me and asking questions like, what should I do, and something like that. At some point, I was going through my therapy. I was going through my transformation. Like I wanted to transform my life. I was learning everything that I learned, not to help other people, but to help me, At some point, I understood how it is working, like how the trauma works, how the behavior works, and how to transform it like quickly. What is the best possible way to transform it quickly? Because I met these approaches, I met these in my experience. So I tried that. I already tried that, and it really works. It really works like tremendously. So for me, it was okay. Now I came to this subconscious therapist. I told her that I want to learn from her. At that moment when we worked, I was already a little bit clairvoyant. I saw what she's doing. I felt like most of the picture that was happening. I did understand how it works and how she's like navigating, because it was like she's navigating my subconscious, and I see that like how is she, because she saw the pictures that I saw, like something like that.
Right.
And I did understand all that, but I didn't get some specific moments that I like when she did something. I was like, where, like, what did you see? So you did this. And I asked her to teach me. And she did. And I learned how to do all this process completely.
Okay. Neat. So you've moved in your own transformation, and then now you're feeling good in your body. You're not getting sick regularly. But what about when something happens in life that feels chaotic, or it knocks you off, or could even cause another trauma because of the situation? Do you have a tool or something that you go to that helps you get through that process?
This complex question, I'm trying to like understand how to answer and not take up a few hours for that.
I mean, for instance,
Um,
I could tell you for me, one of the big things that has helped me to get into my body, and now I consider it a therapy, is ecstatic dance. So if I just
mhm,
lose myself in the music and I'm moving my body for a prolonged period of time, the emotions that I'm feeling don't stay stagnant in my body, they move. And so I'm able to clear the energy out, which allows me to be more level headed and not store whatever I'm going through in my body. So that's just
mhm.
that, and breath work, I would say, are my own two personal go to tools whenever I'm having something come up.
Yes, I understand, but for me, usually I don't. Now, I'm not getting sick at all. Like for 8 years, I'm not getting sick. Not even a flu, not even something. Only I have had like 3 cases through this period when I got heavily sick. And that was the more like, for example, 40 Celsius temperature. I don't know how to Fahrenheit, so I'm sorry. Like it is high temperature, high fever, high like everything, like almost feeling like almost dying and all the stuff. And that was the moments of really big change, like really tremendous change. And sometimes my body wants to go through this path to heal. So I'm late. I'm healing myself still. So I'm not like taking any drugs. I have a story about the drugs because like at some point they did stopped working on me, like at all. It was like, oh my God, and they stopped working on me. And so I'm not taking drugs. I'm just healing myself with the energy, with the everything. But I'm doing it intuitively, so I don't do some kind of Reiki or something. I don't know how to do that. So I'm just focusing on my body and going through my body. And actually, this is the instrument that I use when I get into some situation, for example, like stuck emotions and something like that. If something is not flowing, if something is like stuck or something, or I'm having some kind of distress, but it is actually really rare because I'm not having distress. Nothing, there is no events in my life that would like stop me or make me some in a
Your
bad
in,
mood or something.
your
Like,
intuition, does it, like, do you pause and go like a mini meditation?
yes, I will explain how I do it. But like the main thing, how I do it, and this is like the direct way for me. And actually, this is how I kind of the part of the process, how I help my clients heal is I'm focusing on the emotion start in our body always. There is no way it is somewhere else. It is in our body and there is sensation. Always sensation, some kind of sensation or something like itching or something. And I always find it and focus on that. And then I go deep submerging in that, something like that. So, and it works like really quickly because when you go through resistance, there is a resistance. You go through resistance and you just go down this emotion and you resolve it. So it is more like, it could be like breathing, but it is like direct breathing. So I'm breathing into specific spots and deepening myself in this emotion and actually expanding it. And I don't know, is it understandable what I'm saying?
I mean, yes and no. I understand it, but I think it is also a process that without experiencing it, the full understanding for anybody.
Yeah, actually, I can for our listeners, I can try to explain it other way. So, for example, you hit your hand and it is aching. There is no way you can stop this ache with some putting air from your, like doing this, or maybe doing this, or maybe doing this. There is no way it will go away because it is hurting inside. And if you put your attention in this spot, just put attention and let it be. Maybe you have some pain in your body right now. Doesn't matter, like you can use, actually I recommend to try not to hit your head. Just for example, when you do yoga or you do some heavy lifting or something like that, like for example, you stand in the plank and it starts, you have the pain in your hands or in your neck, in your back, or somewhere you have the pain. So you can try this technique there. So you're standing and you focus, you're not just standing, you focus on this pain. You're just letting this pain attention, giving this pain attention. And it will look like miracle actually. The pain will go away if you not move your attention. It is just you letting it be, you like watching it and letting it be, you letting yourself feel it. So it is all like complex process, but like just focus on this pain and it will go away. The same thing if you, for example, touch the hot pot or something, like you get burned, and it will also go away like in the moment, because all this, like actually pain, I love the phrase, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So pain is like first seconds of the event. After that, it is suffering. And you can stop suffering like from the moment it happened. So every pain you can remove like this.
I love that. That's like words of wisdom, that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
Yes, we choose suffering because of the patterns.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And just thinking about all the times in my life where I've rolled through scenarios in my own mind or thought, well, woe is me because a situation is happening and I feel powerless or out of control in those moments. And so then I've allowed myself to go more into a victim mentality instead of feeling what it is or letting it move through me. Or yeah, that's poetic.
Yes, kind of.
Awesome. Well, you do some really beautiful work, and it sounds like people really come out transformed. Usually, when you work with people, is it one session? Do they work with you multiple times? How does that work for them?
Actually, I have like different process depending on the results that person wants. But mainly when we talk about like deep therapy, subconscious therapy, I mean, that means that I will be working with the root cause. People usually have 2 or 3 root causes, and that's all. So usually it is just few sessions with me, with time in between, like, so when we just go through this process. So it's like that. It is not like they have to come to me like every week and like do some like deep therapy every week, and not that. Usually one therapy session a month, maybe 3 weeks. For example, each person is individual, so some people process things really quickly, and it is like they going through this process and they are ready to go to another, but usually 1 month. between sessions because it is really deep and it is really transforming. After this session, you wake up in the different reality. Like you really wake up and you feel that everything that you see and how you perceive what you see is different. It is unexplainable, actually. It is like you have just to feel it because it is like you are waking up into different reality, not just only for perception, but also with events, different events starting happening in your life. So it's like that. And it is big change. It is a really big change for like 2 hour session. And people need to adapt to that, let's say. So, and I'm of course I'm helping. Actually, this is the main part of my therapy because adaptation is process, and we can transform like this root cause, but we need to adapt into new reality. So I'm helping them to adapt to this new reality because there is a mind who will be saying, "Oh my God, what is happening?" and all the stuff. Like I need to help with that also. So I'm like, it is not just session, it is also support that I'm giving my clients to integrate all that. So yeah.
Wow, that's really beautiful. And are you taking new clients if somebody sees this and resonates with you?
Usually start with some introduction session because sometimes people don't need this kind of deep transformation and I can help them in other ways. So for example, people would want to like change something in their life, but they need like more constant support, like they want to have a calls every week and all this stuff. I have business experience. I have coaching experience. So I help in like holistic, I would say, approach. So for example, a person comes to me and they want to expand their business. And we are working, of course, with the inner part, but also we are working with what they should do in order to get to their goal and like what opportunities to invite and all this stuff. I'm working like that also. It depends on what the person wants. But for usually I have different kinds of clients. For example, like this is the business people. Other people is people who are looking like they trying to find their purpose. So like they don't know what to do, or maybe they are like in the middle between, they already find what to do, but they are like imposter syndrome and all this stuff, something like that. This is like my specialty, And the third part of people are with the sicknesses. But for some reason, and I don't know why, my specialty is incurable sicknesses. So people come to me when doctors cannot help. That doesn't matter like what it is, viable or not, just not so much viable, doesn't matter. Actually, this is like my third part of people. They come just for help. So they need their help back. Most of the people with these issues, they've been in some kind of trying some medicines and all the stuff for decades usually. So when they say like, I've been trying to heal this thing for decades, I'm like, okay, we will do that. So yes, of course, I'm open to new clients, but we will start with some introduction. We will find out what person needs, then we will go for some direction. Depends on the request.
Okay, cool. And I'll leave links in the show notes and description so people can easily look that up and click on it and then find you and connect if that's something they're interested in. So we're coming close to the end, and I always ask people, so what is like one piece of wisdom that you've learned in your life that you could leave the audience with?
It is my favorite piece of wisdom. Our soul came into this life to transform emotion, only for that, not to bring people in this life, not to make money, just to transform the emotions. And it is like the core thing that is happening in this world. And when you want to live a more expanded, more fulfilled life, you skip all this mental bullshit and focus on transforming emotions. So if there is the emotions that you cannot process, If you have fears about something and all the stuff, focus on that. Just find the people who can help you with that, and your life will be transformed like so quickly, because it is the quickest way. Because the soul came here to transform emotion. Because actually, it is really explainable. When soul is flying there, we don't know, but let's pretend. Flying there, they don't have body to transform emotion. They don't. So that is why they come in here, because there is like this meat that could transform this emotional energy.
Awesome. I love that. I'm going to keep that in mind too. Here to transform emotion. As an emotional person, I have lots of them. Well, thank you.
Me too. And I managed to like manage them, not the way around, you know.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I really appreciate getting to talk to you today, and it's been a beautiful conversation. And I'm really excited about all of the people's lives that you get to transform. How cool is that? Thank you once again.
Thank you so much for having me. I had like really great time. I love to talk about all this stuff. Actually, I can talk about like for hours, really. So thank you so much for inviting me, for giving me an opportunity to share my voice. It is really important for me. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining That's Just Human. And if you like what you saw, either if you're on YouTube or what you hear on a listening platform, please follow me. It helps the show get out there. Share if you think somebody in your life needs to hear the wise words that were here and said today. And as you go through life, just be kind, be you, and remember, everything is part of the journey.